Welcome everyone.
Thank you.
Hi Aravind. It's good seeing you
Hi,
after some time.
nice to see
Welcome
you.
to another series of Heartfulness Wellness webinars. Today we're going to talk about an important topic, spirituality and mental health. This is very relevant in these times. And we are very fortunate to have a dear friend of mine, Dr. Aravind Komuravelli, here with us to share his thoughts and ideas on spirituality and mental health. He is a consultant psychiatrist and an associate medical director at Hollands Park Hospital, Warrington, UK. He also plays a key role in the delivery of safe services through a contribution to clinical governance processes. He has rich teaching experience, research. He published papers, and he has also done various presentations. He also won Clinical Excellence Awards in Boroughs Partnership NHS Foundation Trust in 2013 and 2016. And I'm also happy to say that Aravind is a very dear friend of mine for a long time. And we went to med school together. And ever since I've known him, he has been one of the very gentle and kind persons, very knowledgeable. And I'm very happy to host this seminar. And my name is Thimmapuram. I'm an internal medicine hospitalist at Wellspun York Hospital. Welcome, Aravind. How are you?
Thank you, Jairam. I'm fine. How are you?
Doing all right. Looking forward to this session. And I also see that you have done so many studies on dementia as well. You've been a principal investigator for dementia clinical trials, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Excellent. So today, we're going to talk a little bit about how we can address this issue of mental health, especially in relationship with spirituality. Aravind, you and I, we've been practicing meditation for a long time. And we know that in our own experience, these practices have helped in our mental well-being. And today we'll go into a little bit depth and talk a little bit about it. Okay. So Aravind, from your standpoint, what do you think would be a good definition of health? I think it's a good place to start.
Yeah, sure. I mean, before we start talking about health, what I would just like to mention is that I'm not an expert as such in the area of spirituality, but as you mentioned, we've both been practicing spirituality for a number of years, practicing heartfulness for a number of years, so about 20 years. And based on this experience in spirituality and also in mental health psychiatry, so based on the understanding, based on the experience, based on what I've learned, I'm going to be talking about that. So it's up to the viewers to kind of analyze it, feel the thing, and then kind of make a decision about whether they think this is appropriate or not. So I would suggest that they do their own scientific analysis on what we are talking about, and then come to a conclusion about whether that is appropriate or not. So just coming back to your question about health. So in terms of health, the definition of health has varied through the generations, through the centuries. So when you consider the Western definition of health, I mean, currently the definition of health is more about either physical health or mental health. And it's more defined, if you look at the Oxford Dictionary of Health, it's defined as a state where you don't have any illness or injuries. So it's based on the absence of a pathology in the body. So that's where it is defined as a health. So when you look at the threshold for health, it's set low. So in terms of the Western definitions of health, and in terms of the current definitions of health. But obviously, WHO, World Health Organization, expands a bit more in terms of health. So it talks about health as a combined entity. So not just physical health. It says the health is not just about physical health, but it's also about mental health and social health. So it's about the well-being in total. And if you look back to centuries and look back to the Greek origins of health, so the health is derived from the word which means whole or holy. So the concept, when it was started, it was not just based on one particular area of health, but as a combined entity. So when you look at the Vedic psychology, so it actually goes much deeper than that. So in terms of the width of it, yes, it does cover everything in terms of physical, mental, emotional, social, but also it goes much deeper inside. So I was quite amazed. I mean, in terms of looking at some of the literature regarding Vedic psychology, I mean, I've read psychiatry and psychology for quite some years now, but in terms of when I read the Vedic psychology, I was quite surprised, quite amazed at the depth of knowledge that existed thousands of years ago. So it's also, once you understand the concept, you find it very simple. You can relate to it very easily. So basically, health in Indian context or the ancient Indian context is swasthya. So it comes from two words, swa, which means self, sta, which means centered. So basically, Patanjali is one of the person who codifies all this ancient knowledge and writes the Patanjali Sutras on yogic psychology. So basically, he defines health as someone who is being centered in themselves. So basically, this self-centeredness is not just about the superficial self. He talks about the inner self, the divine self. So one who can center themselves in the deep inside the causal body, which is the soul or the Atman. So that person is defined as being healthy or swasthya. So in terms of the threshold for health, so if you compare to the current context, it's much higher. So you may not be healthy even if you don't have an illness, but you have some disturbance inside you. So according to that ancient Indian context or the Vedic or the yogic psychology context, you're still not healthy because it's not just about physical health. It's not just about absence of disease or illness or injury. It goes much deeper.
It's wonderful, Aravind. I like the word swasthya, centered within oneself. It conveys a much deeper meaning than what we know of in terms of the modern definitions of health. It's beautiful. One thing, Aravind, we see that the mental health problems are on the increase, right? The practices of yoga are more popular now compared to ever before. They're very widely used. Do they help in improving mental health?
Certainly, there is growing evidence in terms of yoga and mental health. There have been a number of studies, and Heartfulness itself has been doing studies on that. So in terms of yogic psychology point of view, or in terms of understanding how it helps, so Patanjali basically describes about how you understand the mental health. So basically there are three different types of bodies. So you have the causal body, which we talked about in terms of the Atman, which is at the deepest core. And then you have the heart-mind region. But also in terms of Patanjali's terms, he also lists a few things, which is consciousness, which is chit. And then you have the manas, which is the mind. You have the intellect, which says it's buddhi. And then you have the ahankar, which is the ego. And that's the subtle body. And then you have the peripheral body. So peripheral body could be, it could be nervous system, it could be circulatory system, it could be the hormonal system in terms of the modern terminology. So all these three things are interconnected. So basically, in terms of defining health, what Patanjali says is that before you actually identify a disease, you see changes inside your body at a much earlier stage. So disease is like a later manifestation. And to kind of look after yourself or look after your health, especially mental health, what Patanjali says is that you have to progress towards your inner self, where you have the absolute stillness or the tranquility. As you go peripherally, if you lose that connection within yourself, that's when the mind becomes more turbulent. So it becomes more wayward, it kind of moves around, doesn't have a fixed direction. So it loses its one word kind of direction, one pointedness. So to bring it back to your inner self, so that is how yoga works. So yogic psychology is about viewing yourself into the inside and then going outside. So basically, when you go to your daily activities, so you can still maintain that connection within yourself and then still do your peripheral activities or worldly activities or mundane activities. And heartfulness very wonderfully describes this process. So in terms of some of the ancient Indian contexts or even worldly contexts, spirituality has been viewed as the main purpose of life at the expense of material life. So what has happened in some contexts is that some of the saints or the rishis or the sages, they have focused more on the spiritual context and not kind of given enough importance to the material context. So which has led to celibacy or sannyasi or being away from the worldly context. Whereas heartfulness kind of combines the two and says that you have to look after your spiritual self as well as your material self. And you can't ignore either of these two. So it is like two wings of a bird. You can't fly with just one wing. So you need to have both the wings. So you need to look after your family, you have to look after your job, as well as look after your spiritual self. So as long as we do that, the mental health will be well maintained, because you can still dive deep into that stillness or the calmness or the peace inside you. And the disturbance will be very less even when you engage in worldly activities. And I think Daji from Heartfulness, as well as Patanjali, gives the example of the lotus flower. So even if the lotus flower, even though it's in a muddy pond, it still maintains its beauty. So even when you have the raindrop, it doesn't actually disturb the leaf. It doesn't wet the leaf. So the lotus still maintains its identity, its beauty, in spite of the environment around it. So similarly, whatever work we are doing, as long as we maintain that inner connection within us, we can still maintain that tranquility, and that in turn improves our mental health. Mental health is just one part of the thing. So as long as we look after the inner spiritual well-being, then you look after your mental health, you look after the physical health, and look after the social well-being and everything. So from a Vedic psychology point of view, we can't consider health in certain dimensions. We have to look at it as a whole entity.
Excellent. And so you're saying all the mental health problems or any kind of problems stem from stepping away from the center of that stillness, from the center where it is almost a vibration-free stillness. So the farther we move away from it, the more colorings we acquire, the more deviations we go along. The course is diverted from the center to the periphery, and we accumulate so many things. And you think that is how we can explain the mental health problems from an yogic psychology standpoint. Yeah. Wonderful, Aravind. It's wonderful.
I mean, we can consider this as an example. So say you have a very old car, a very old diesel car. So when it is running, it does make a lot of noise, but it's not very efficient in terms of how it runs. And it doesn't last too long in terms of the life itself. Whereas when you have a very new electric car, like a Tesla car, doesn't make any noise, but it's very efficient, very smooth, lasts longer. So something like that. So when our mind is not burdened by the external environment, it's so smooth, it's so peaceful, because you still have that connection inside. So you're not burnt out by the external activities, by the external kind of pressures that you have, or the stresses that we have.
Very nice, Arvind. So how is this different from Western psychology, Arvind?
I mean, in terms of Western psychology, basically, if you look at how it has evolved, so in terms of health in general, before we look into the psychology aspects or mental health aspect of it. So in terms of Western science, it has kind of evolved very much at the time of Renaissance. Before that, science was suppressed. Basically, if you look at some of the institutions that misused religion and then suppressed science, as a result, after that, then the scientific revolution came, Renaissance came. So they started questioning anything which is abstract, which does not have evidence. So basically, the focus moved on to the cause and the effect, something where you can actually show the cause of it to believe it. So until and unless an evidence is found, it wasn't believed. So that's how the direction of science moved along. So one of the good things about it is, yes, you will be following a practice which is based on evidence. So you won't be swayed away by different things which are far away from reality. But you do lose some connection to things which can't be proved by science. So if the science is limited, because science can't measure everything, especially if you look at mental health or from psychology point of view, in terms of measuring or looking at the emotions, looking at the feelings, they can be described, but they can't be measured in terms of scientific terms. So similarly, if you look at psychology point of view or psychiatry point of view, the focus has been on the illness or the disease, similar to physical health. So how it evolved is you start from a disease process or an illness process and try to understand how it has developed. And then you go back into your life, into your younger days, and then you look at the wider family and wider society, and then try to make a link between what has happened in the past and how you are reacting now, how it has affected your mental health. But in terms of yogic psychology, it goes much deeper. So if you look at it, we described about the causal body, we described about the subtle bodies, but it also describes about the vibrational fields that are there, which is called as pranamaya kosha. And it describes about the effects on these vibrational fields that later affect your physical health and mental health. And also yogic psychology or the ancient Indian wisdom talks about how the mental tendencies are formed. So there are different kind of tendencies that are described or thought patterns that are described. So if you look at yogic psychology, you have vrittis, so which is about the thinking patterns. These are the instinctive thinking patterns. So it could be rightful thinking or it could be wrongful thinking. And Patanjali also describes about fantasy or imagination. So which is about, which he calls as vikalpa. So this is again a different set of thinking pattern. And in terms of imagination, he differentiates this from higher kind of imagination, which is more creative thinking, or which is born out of expansion of consciousness. Vikalpa is much lower. And then he talks about memory, and then he talks about sleep. And it's about the thinking pattern, which then affects what happens to us in terms of mental health. So they are called kleshas. So kleshas is there in Hindu terminology. It's also there in Buddhist terminology. Kleshas are the one which actually are the root causes of or various mental illness or physical illness or the various kind of turbulence that happens. So the commonest klesha that Patanjali describes is avidya. So it's basically, it's of lack of awareness or right knowledge. So here it is not just about the physical knowledge, it's about the lack of awareness about the inner universe which is inside us. When that is lacking, then that gives rise to various other kind of kleshas or other kind of false thinking patterns, or what he calls as colored thinking or colored perception. So basically you're not seeing things properly because your thought process is already colored. You're already prejudiced in how you see things. So apart from avidya, he talks about asmita, which is about egotism. So where you attach to yourself, and then raga, which is about attachment to various things. It could also be about mundane things. And then there is dvesha. So obviously you know about dvesha as aversion. And then he also talks about a very important klesha, which is about the fear of death, which is, I think he calls it as abhinivesha. So fear of death is something which can manifest in different ways. So again, if you look at Vedic psychology, so it's not just about the fear in that particular life. So it could be about various lives, so sometimes hundreds of lives, or various million or many lives. So basically what happens is that the fear or the kleshas can be there, can be carried on from one life onto the other. So when you try to analyze a person, when you try to analyze the fear or mental kind of anxiety which is there, sometimes you don't actually find the cause in it, because that person might have been brought up in a very nice family, must have had very nice upbringing. You try to analyze everything, but still you can't actually trace where this fear is coming from. But if you look at it from a yogic psychology point of view, so it can be from various lives, from the previous lives. So all these kleshas, so these are the colored perceptions, then actually lead to vikshepas. So vikshepas he defines in various aspects. So the culmination of kleshas leads to vikshepas. So vikshepas could be about vyadhi, which is about disease or illness, or it could be about mental apathy or mental laziness he talks about. And also he talks about being careless, or sometimes indulging in several things, or not having that non-attachment, or being indulged in various things. So, and also having excessive doubt, samshaya. So all these things result from the kleshas. And then from the vikshepas, which are the obstacles or distractions, these result in vignas. So vignas are the ultimate effect of all these things that happen from vrittis, then to kleshas, then to vikshepas, and then you have vignas. So vignas are described in various things like dukkha, which is pain. It could be physical or mental, or it could be despair or depression. Patanjali even describes the physical symptoms of it. So he describes about disorders in inhalation and exhalation. So similar like a panic attack. When you have a panic attack, you're breathing very heavily, breathing in and breathing out very heavily. He also describes about the tremulousness of the body, which are the tremors again, which you see in panic attacks. So these are the effects of vikshepas. So if you compare it to the modern psychology, so you have the concept of cognitive behavioral therapy. So it talks about cognitions, which is the thinking aspect, and then the behavior. So it's about how you behave, and then what happens as a result of it. So each one influences the another. So similarly, in yogic psychology, if you consider with these vikshepas, kleshas, vikshepas, and vignas, you see a connection. And it's not just one directional connection. It could, if things are not kind of controlled or not regulated, it becomes like a vicious cycle. So what the vignas can in turn affect the vrittis. So the thinking pattern could become like a permanent fixed thing, or it could be a wrongful thinking forever if it's not corrected. So all these things are like a vicious cycle. So until they are broken, you cannot come out of them. So that's basically about the mental health, mental illness that's described by Patanjali.
Wow, that's wonderful, Arvind. I think you covered the whole of yogic psychology in a nutshell. It's
Sorry, I
beautiful.
went on and on. I might have deviated from the topic.
No, I think uh, that is a very clear distinction between the approach to the mental health or the psychology from a Western point of view compared to an Eastern point of view. And at some point, both the Eastern and the Western should merge to see how best we can offer a complete well-being to a human being, whether they come from the East or the West or anywhere. So
Yeah.
this is beautiful, Arvind. This is beautiful.
Yeah, it is actually happening in terms of the merger between the Western and the Eastern psychology to some extent. So now the health is being considered in entirety. So instead of physical health or mental health or the separation between these two, now we are looking at health and well-being in its entirety. So about the social well-being, physical well-being, and the mental well-being. And also you've got mindfulness, which again arises from a Buddhist kind of meditation, which is being followed in the modern context, which has been successfully been implemented for treating mental disorders or mental illnesses. So it is happening in terms of the looking at the wider context, though not completely. It's heading in the right direction.
Right. One of the things that we are seeing is stress has become a part of our lives, right? And our lifestyle is different now. What is it that led us to this stage, Arvind?
In terms of stress or the modern lifestyle that you described, again, if you look at it from yogic psychology point of view, basically we have lost that kind of simplistic lifestyle or simplistic thinking that's supposed to be there, or we have lost about that living that in tune with nature. We are not able to do that. So as a result, as we talked about earlier, we have lost that inner connection, and we are moving a bit more peripherally, though there is this realization that there needs to we need to travel back into the inside. But mostly in terms of the modern lifestyle, because there are so many things happening peripherally in terms of the various stimuli that can be there in the mind and also outside in terms of the external world. So we also have lost that living in tune with the circadian rhythm of the body. So we don't have a particular pattern in terms of when we eat, when we sleep, because nature or our body has a certain clock, and when we ignore the clock, it does kind of disturb the balance which is there. And once that balance is disturbed, then it kind of disturbs the bioenergy fields or the pranamaya kosha that yogic psychology talks about. And that in turn has an effect on the physical and mental health. And to actually, when we get disturbed by various stimuli or various things that happen outside, we have that despair, which again Patanjali talks about. So we have some kind of pain that we all feel in the modern lives. And to deal with the pain, because we don't go back to the origin of the pain, so whether it is psychological pain or emotional or physical pain, if we don't go back to the origin of the pain, we are only treating the symptom, but not the cause of it. So for example, in the medical field, if you have fever or high temperature, if you just take a paracetamol, it might cure the fever, but it doesn't cure the cause of it. So you need to go back and see what's actually causing this. So whether it is a chest infection or some other kind of infection. So similarly, when we have pain, so we, instead of seeking for pleasure, which gives temporary relief to the pain, but again, after some time, the pain is all followed by pleasure. So that's like two sides of the same coin. So you have this duality. So when you try to deal with the pain, you have pleasure, then that's inevitably followed by pain. So we have to move away from these kind of things and look for a permanent solution. So that's only when you go inside yourself.
Awesome. I like this idea, and I'm also happy that you brought up this topic of circadian rhythm and sleep, right? It's one of the major problems that humanity is facing. We have altered our sleep patterns so much that the benefits that sleep offers to us, we have lost some of those benefits. We
That
created this pattern of altered sleep habits, and that disturbs our overall health in almost a fundamental way.
Yeah. I mean, when you look at sleep from a neurological point of view, so basically you have the ascending reticular activating system, which is sending signals to the brain. So what's happening in the modern context is that your mind is still staying active because there are so many stimuli coming from outside, and the mind also itself is very active. So whereas the body gets tired by the end of the day, mind is not able to switch off because it's bombarded by so many stimuli. So that in turn affects the sleep, which in turn affects the physical health or your general well-being. So the only way to switch off or go to sleep is when you regulate your mind. So that's again going back to the basics of things. So also in terms of, if you look at the medical terminology and the Vedic psychology about what happens in terms of fear, on what happens with stress and various things. So in modern terminology, you've got amygdala, you've got prefrontal cortex. So when you are driven by stress or when you're driven by fear, so you have the activation of amygdala, which in turn activates the sympathetic nervous system, which in turn creates a body which is in kind of full flow. So unless you go back to the prefrontal cortex, which is where your conscious kind of brain works, you're not able to regulate the other kinds of nervous system which is there. So in in yogic psychology, so what is said is that you've got various points in your body. So you've got Chandranadi, which in turn activates the parasympathetic nervous system. You've got Suryanadi, which activates the sympathetic nervous system. So when you regulate your mind or regulate your kleshas or the bioenergy fields which are there, then it in turn regulates the Chandranadi and Suryanadi, which is about the balance between the parasympathetic and sympathetic nervous system. So once that is regulated, the body is regulated, and once the body is regulated, the mind is. So it's a kind of two-way direction. So mind regulates the body, body regulates the mind. So sending signals between each other. So that's how you find a balance within yourself. So this is explained in medical terms as well, or you can correlate to the medical terminology as well.
Wonderful, Aravind. I remember you giving a presentation about 22 years ago when we were in med school on parasympathetic nervous system and meditation. That's wonderful. Good to hear that once again. So, coming to our current situation, right? We are going through this COVID-19, which I don't think any one of us would have even imagined that we would be going through such a situation in life. Have you seen any change in mental health issues ever since this COVID-19 has started?
There has been a significant increase in terms of mental health problems, mainly anxiety, stress in relation to COVID, which is understandable because there is so much uncertainty about COVID, about the impact it's going to have on people. And if you look at some of the studies or some of the surveys, so it's quite a lot of people, more than half the people have significant amount of anxieties or mental health problems as a result of COVID, as they're worried about COVID. Again, if you want to understand this kind of anxiety from a yogic psychology point of view, you have to go back to the kleshas. So you have to understand where this fear is coming from. So the primarily it's the abhinivesha or the fear of death. So that kind of determines or that kind of causes the anxiety because we are worried about dying as a result of COVID. But it is also other things as well in terms of attachments that we have, whether it is in terms of body or in terms of family, in terms of life. We are worried about what's going to happen. So ragas, so raga as part of the klesha. So that, and to some extent, asmita or the egotism, it's about me, what's going to happen to me, what's going to happen to my future, things like that. So you can understand it from these points of view and understand where this anxiety is stemming from. And if you want to look at kind of how you can deal with anxiety, there are various levels. So you can just deal with it peripherally. So you can use anxiety management, or you can use just normal relaxation in terms of listening to music or just gentle breathing and things like that. But you can actually go deeper, go and look at the subtle bodies that are there, work on these kind of kleshas, work on this mind and heart and see what can be changed. And heartfulness actually offers a much deeper context in terms of dealing with these kind of anxieties or stress. So basically, there are two things that heartfulness offers. So one is the transmission and the other one is cleaning, which is definitely beneficial, which is something unique about heartfulness in the current context. So transmission in simple words is the utilization of divine energy in terms of transformation of human beings. And when the heartfulness guide, Daji, he talks about divine energy, what he says is different from the normal form of energy. And it's a very subtle kind of force, which a heartfulness guide or trainer can then transmit to a practitioner or someone who's practicing or an abhyasi. So that kind of directs our vision into the self, into the inner self, rather than being focused on the peripheral self. And it is a nourishment to the soul. That is what it's described as. So it nourishes the prana, or the sheets that are there, bioenergy fields that are there. And then it leads to the expansion of the consciousness. So when you look at consciousness, there are several definitions of consciousness. So in very simple or very basic terms, it could be consciousness of the surroundings or the external environment. But then a little bit deeper definition, even in the modern context, is about consciousness, about the inner feelings or inner changes that are happening inside you, which you do it as part of mindfulness as well. And then you have the deeper consciousness, which yogic psychology talks about, and Swami Vivekananda also mentions about. So basically, Swami Vivekananda mentions that consciousness is like a thin film, which is sitting between vast amounts of, like an ocean of super consciousness and an ocean of subconsciousness. So it can be stretched so much, but at the moment it's being limited by some of the other things, mainly by ahankar or ego, and also to some extent by the intellect and the mind. So what heartfulness does is, in terms of we described about transmission, and the other thing is about cleaning. So rather than working on the individual thoughts or individual behaviors or individual symptoms, it works at a very subtle level it works at the vibrational level and on the bioenergy fields. So it works on the kleshas or the samskars. In terms of samskaras, they can happen through the kleshas or the karma, which is not just about actions, but it is also about thoughts, words, and deeds and things like that. All those things have a result which leads to samskaras. So samskaras are the deepened forms of kleshas. So what happens is that they are like hardwired into our brain. So we think that we are free in our lives, but in fact we are not. As a result of samskaras, we are actually programmed to react in a certain way. So it's already inbuilt in terms of how we are going to react to a particular stimulus. So until you deal with this hard wiring thing which is inside us, until you remove the samskaras, you actually do not improve your mental health very vastly. You might improve it from a peripheral point of view in terms of you can alter your thinking. As a result, you can alter your behavior, but not completely. But when you clean the samskaras at the vibrational levels, which in turn has an effect on all the other things. So that in turn leads to an easier transition or easier progression in the spiritual field. And that is a very powerful instrument, I would say. And from my own experience, I would say that has been certainly beneficial in terms of my own thinking, my own perception. You are less prejudiced because you have less miscoloration of how your thought process is. You are able to see it much clearly. So that's how heartfulness can help you in terms of improving your mental health, especially in the context of COVID. So instead of viewing it from a duality point of view, so once all these kinds of things are corrected, you are no longer bothered about what's going to happen to you. You are in tune with nature. So you are living very natural life and you are able to face the reality that happens. And when you are living a healthy lifestyle, it definitely benefits your health and it definitely benefits your immunity. You are less prone to infections as well. There is enough evidence in terms of stress, the effect that it has on immunity and your susceptibility to infections. The more stressed you are or more anxious you are, it doesn't help. It increases the corticosteroids and it reduces the immunity that you have. So a healthier lifestyle through yoga or especially through heartfulness does help in the improvement of health, especially by improving your mental health or your perception and thinking, things like that.
It's wonderful, Aravind. I think what you have mentioned goes much deeper than any kind of help that we can get in terms of managing our emotional, mental, and spiritual well-being, because it goes to the root of the problem and removes the problem at the level of the root and not just trimming the surfaces and making it look better. Wonderful. And it's been some time since we meditated together, and maybe we can go through this relaxation technique that our viewers might enjoy as well.
Certainly.
So let us try this relaxation once again, Aravind, and then we'll wrap up. It's been wonderful talking to you, Aravind.
Thank you, Jerome. Thank you for inviting.
Sure. So please sit comfortably. And gently close your eyes. Breathe normally. Very slowly, move your attention to your toes. You may wiggle them a little and allow your toes to relax. Feel a very relaxing and healing energy entering your feet from the ground, allowing your feet to completely relax. Let this energy slowly move up, relaxing your ankles, your lower legs, the calf muscles, your knees, upper legs, and your hips. Feel all these parts completely relaxed. Let this energy slowly move up, relaxing your lower back and your upper back. Feel your entire back relaxed. Very slowly, move your attention to your stomach area and allow all the muscles in there to relax. Move into your chest and allow your chest to deeply relax. Move on to your shoulders. Feel them getting lighter as if they're melting away. Let this energy slowly move into your upper arms, elbows, your lower arms, your hands, and your fingers all the way to the fingertips. Slowly relax your neck. Gently loosen your jaw. Allow your chin to relax. Your lips and your eyes are very gently closed. Relax all the muscles of your face, including your forehead. Gently move into your mind and allow your mind to deeply and completely relax. Relax all the way to the top of your head and the back of your head. Gently scan your whole body from the top of your head to the tips of your toes and feel your entire body relaxed. Very slowly, move into your heart and settle in there. Rest your attention on the source of divine light within your heart. Do this in a very gentle and natural way. If your attention drifts, it's okay. It's very normal. Gently keep bringing it back to your heart and feel as if the source of light within is attracting your attention inwards, and gently relax into that awareness. And stay there for a minute. You may slowly come back to the present moment and very gently open your eyes. Thank you. Thank you all viewers for attending this wellness initiative. If you have any questions or queries on well-being, you're welcome to send an email to wellness@heartfulness.org. And if you are interested, there is a way in which you can connect very deeply with heartfulness. There are certain apps that you can use, especially the Hearts app, where you can use it to guide your own meditation practice, where you can also connect with a trainer completely free of cost. There is a way in which you can learn about heartfulness through the master classes. Heartfulness magazine is a very useful resource for you to explore. There are also educational sessions on the Udemy site. The website is there, daji.org/Udemy. And there are also ways in which you can stay connected. There is a very nice series on YouTube. There is also a website called adizes.com/heartfulness where you can look at the conversation between two very highly expertful opinions about managing ourselves in this crisis. One is the master of management, the other one is a master of spirituality. I think you will love that. There is a way in which you can enhance your own knowledge through Pearl webinar series, and there is Glow webinar series as well. And these are also the times when sometimes the heart longs to give, and there are ways in which you can contribute. There is a COVID-19 relief fund, and if your heart so desires, you're welcome to contribute. And there is a helpline, Voice That Cares, and the number is there on the screen. And sometimes all it requires is praying for the well-being of everyone. And this is something that you can take a look at on heartfulness.org/universal prayer. So thank you all once again for joining us, and it's been a pleasure having you all. And thank you once again, Aravind. It's been wonderful connecting with you.
Thank you, Jayram. It was a really good experience.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.